Good morning. I'm very grateful to be speaking after Barry's excellent introductory presentation, because I think it did an excellent job of laying out the challenges that that China faces both in the immediate term and also in the longer term. In particular, I think he did an excellent job of pointing to the financial fragility right now that China faces, and giving a sense of urgency that I think is often missing or has been missing from discussions, and I find creeping in, but I still think is not fully appreciated. This sense of urgency to addressing some of the immediate imbalances that China faces, so that it can go on and address some of the longer term challenges. I would feel much more comfortable if this panel was being held in 2010, in the third plenum document had come out in 2010, because I think 2010 was a critical year. And please forgive me, I don't, this might be considered water under the bridge, but I think it actually it says something important about where we are now. 2010 was a critical year because the 2009 stimulus had taken place, and one can criticize it, but at the end of the day, every country in the world was responding in an ad hoc manner to the crisis that unfolded. They were throwing the kitchen sink, everything, including the kitchen sink, at the problem, not knowing how big the problem would be, and China did the same. And there were some good things that came out of it. There were some longer-term problems that came out of it, but I think the key was in 2010 there was a rising recognition that some problems had emerged, that China was facing a new reality going forward. We saw rising inflation from the credit expansion that took place. We saw some attempt to account for the amount of debt that had been created, particularly with local governments. And we saw an effort to rein in, well, by the end of the year, we saw an effort by the PBOC to try to rein in credit. But there was a choice that was made, or I would argue a choice that wasn't made, that to actually recognize that the painkiller was not the cure, that there was a real economic adjustment that needed to take place going forward, that China would have to find a new growth driver rather than export and investment-led growth, and credit-fueled investment-led growth, and that this shift needed to take place. And I think, unfortunately, I think that if China had said at that point that, look, given what's going on in the world, 5 to 6% GDP growth wouldn't actually be a bad thing. We need to impose some discipline here on the investment stimulus that has taken place, and take a step back and tell a different narrative about the Chinese economy and where it needs to go, rather than simply hitting the highest growth target around. I think that we would be facing a very different situation today. But unfortunately, what took place was there was an unwillingness to step away from growth targets. And we saw the explosion in the shadow banking system as an end run around the attempt by the PBOC to try to rein in credit. And really a number of problems that were manageable problems in 2010 metastasized and have become very serious problems now that need to be dealt with. And so when we talk about reforms, we talk about the kinds of reforms. I think they really are in two categories. The first are longer-term reforms. They're medium to long-term reforms that can unfold over the course of the next few years, that are really about discovering or enabling new forms of competitive advantage, new forms of productivity gains in the Chinese economy, unlocking a new path forward. And whether that's hukou reform, whether that's a local government finance, whether that is urbanization, whether that is SOE reform, those things are important and they need to take place, but they can unfold over a period of time. There's a second set of reforms that are really about addressing the fact that China for the past 3 to 4 years has continued down a path that was unsustainable, and that really should have changed tracks in 2010, didn't, and a number of problems have emerged out of that, including a mounting bad debt problem, more and more credit being locked up in supporting existing levels of GDP, supporting levels of investment that are not sustainable, and producing less and less actual output as a result, more and more of it devoted to rolling over bad debt. And I would argue that for the second set of reforms to take place, for the first set of more longer term, medium to long term reforms to actually take hold, there is an urgent need to tackle that second set, which is to change the incentives that currently continue to misallocate resources in directions that do not move the Chinese economy forward, that actually dig the hole deeper. And so when we talk about benchmarks for what we hope to see, look, some of these reforms are going to, like I say, unfold over the course of years, and we shouldn't expect immediate changes. But I do expect, and I think we ought to expect and need to expect to see some immediate changes in terms of credit expansion, in terms of control over shadow banking, in terms of accountability for losses and the dealing with the resolution of losses, recognition and resolution of losses that have taken place within the system, so that they don't become an obstacle or continue to be a larger and larger obstacle to making more meaningful reforms that change the dynamics of the Chinese economy. And in the interest of time, I'm sure that there'll be plenty of time to dig into these things deeper, but I think I'll stop here and just emphasize that there are reforms that need to take place today, if not yesterday, and we should be looking, and I hope that we will see signs that they are taking place.